Eleanor Sinclair had everything money could buy. A mansion in Boston, servants at her beck and call, and a future as the heiress to one of America's greatest railroad fortunes. But Eleanor craved the one thing her wealthy upbringing couldn't provide: freedom from the gilded cage of high society. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. So she did the unthinkable. With nothing but a small satchel of belongings and her mother's locket hidden beneath her plain cotton dress, Eleanor stepped off the train in the dusty town of Willow Creek, Colorado, her identity buried beneath the name Ellie Smith and her soft hands soon to be calloused by honest work. What she never anticipated was Jackson Hayes, the brooding owner of the Silverhorn Ranch, who saw right through her clumsy attempts at farm work, but not through her carefully crafted lies. As their worlds collided, Eleanor found herself caught between the life she was born into and the life she was building with her own two hands. A life that suddenly included falling for a man who would despise her if he knew the truth. The morning sun crested over the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the platform of the Willow Creek train station. Eleanor Sinclair, now Ellie Smith, stepped down from the third-class carriage, her legs wobbly after the 3-day journey from Boston. The smell of coal smoke and dust filled her nostrils, so different from the perfumed parlors of her father's estate. "Last stop, Willow Creek," the conductor called, tipping his hat as he helped an elderly woman down the steps behind her. Eleanor clutched her small leather satchel tighter and surveyed the town spread before her. A single dirt road lined with wooden storefronts, a church, steeple rising in the distance, mountains looming beyond. Nothing like the sprawling metropolis she'd left behind. This was it. Her grand experiment in freedom, her escape. At 23 years old, Eleanor had grown weary of the endless parade of suitors her father, William Sinclair, had paraded before her, each one more interested in the Sinclair railroad fortune than in Eleanor herself. The final straw had come when her father announced her engagement to Gregory Thornton, the son of his business partner, without even consulting her. "It's decided, Eleanor," her father had declared over breakfast 3 weeks ago, not even looking up from his newspaper. "The merger of our companies through your marriage will secure the Sinclair legacy for generations." That night, she'd made her decision. Drawing out the modest sum she'd managed to save from her allowance, she'd purchased a ticket west under a false name. Her destination had been chosen at random, a small town in Colorado, far from her father's business connections, where no one would recognize the daughter of William Sinclair, the railroad baron of the East. "Miss, do you need assistance?" A boy no older than 12, with a freckled face and sandy hair, interrupted her thoughts. "Oh, no, thank you," Eleanor replied, quickly remembering to soften her Boston accent. "Just getting my bearings." "You lookin' for work?" "Most newcomers are," the boy said, eyeing her simple dress and small bag with curiosity. Eleanor nodded. "As a matter of fact, I am." "Then you should see Mrs. Wilson at the general store." He pointed down the main street. "She knows who's hiring. My pa says she knows everything about everyone in Willow Creek." "Thank you," Eleanor said, pressing a nickel into the boy's palm. It was a modest tip by her standards. But the boy's eyes widened. "Gee, thanks, miss." He pocketed the coin and scampered off. Eleanor adjusted her bonnet and started down the dusty street, conscious of how her walking boots, the plainest pair she owned, yet still finely made, stood out against the worn boardwalk. She'd need to be careful with details like that. The wealthy left traces of their privilege in the most unexpected ways. The bell above the door jingled as Eleanor entered Wilson's general store. The familiar sense of coffee, leather, and dried goods mingled in the air, reminding her of childhood. Visits to shops with her nanny, always through the back entrance, of course, as Sinclairs didn't mingle with shopkeepers. A plump woman with silver-streaked hair pinned in a practical bun looked up from where she was arranging fabric bolts. "Good morning, dear. You must be new to town." Her gaze was warm but shrewd, taking in every detail of Eleanor's appearance. "Yes, ma'am. Ellie Smith," Eleanor said, extending her hand. "I've just arrived from the East and I'm looking for work." Mrs. Wilson wiped her hands on her apron before shaking Eleanor's. "Martha Wilson, what kind of work are you looking for, Miss Smith? We don't have many positions for young ladies in Willow Creek besides housekeeping or teaching, and the school's already got Miss Parker." Eleanor had anticipated this question and prepared her answer. "I'm willing to do anything honest, Mrs. Wilson. I grew up helping my father on our farm." The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but necessary. In truth, the closest Eleanor had come to farm work was touring the gardens at her father's estate. Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Farm work, is it? Well, that's fortunate timing. Jackson Hayes from the Silverhorn Ranch was in yesterday, saying they need extra hands for the season." She eyed Eleanor's slender frame doubtfully. "It's hard work, mind you. The Hayes Ranch is the largest cattle operation in the county. I'm stronger than I look," Eleanor assured her, standing straighter, "and I learn quickly." Mrs. Wilson seemed unconvinced, but nodded toward a bulletin board near the back of the store. "The ranch is 5 miles north of town. Mr. Hayes is particular about who he hires, but they're short-handed after 2 of his men left to try their luck in the goldfields." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." Eleanor turned to go, but the shopkeeper called. "After her? Miss Smith, do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Eleanor hesitated. She had planned to find lodging after securing employment. "I thought not," Mrs. Wilson said with a small smile. "There's a room above the store. It's simple, but clean. $2 a week, meals included. You can stay until you sort out your situation." The kindness in the woman's voice almost undid Eleanor. In Boston, people were cordial but rarely genuinely kind, especially to strangers. "That's very generous, Mrs. Wilson. I accept gratefully." After settling into the small but tidy room, Eleanor ventured back out. If she was to convince anyone she belonged here, she needed to familiarize herself with the town. More importantly, she needed to learn about the Silverhorn Ranch and its owner before presenting herself for employment. The Silver Dollar Saloon seemed the likeliest place for information. Eleanor had never entered such an establishment. It would have been scandalous for a Sinclair daughter, but Ellie Smith had no such constraints. She pushed through the batwing doors, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The midday crowd was sparse. A few men playing cards, a bartender polishing glasses, and an older man sweeping the floor. Conversation paused briefly as heads turned toward her, then resumed with heightened interest. Eleanor approached the bar, trying to project confidence. "Excuse me, sir. I'd like some information about the Silverhorn Ranch." The bartender, a man with an impressive mustache and kind eyes, set down his cloth. "The Silverhorn? You got business with Jackson Hayes?" "I'm hoping to," Eleanor replied. "I understand he's hiring farmhands." A chuckle ran through the men at the nearest table. "Jackson doesn't hire women for ranch work," said a grizzled man with a weathered face, "especially not city girls playing cowhand." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm not from the city. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania." Another lie, but one she needed to maintain. "No offense intended, miss," the bartender said, shooting a warning glance at the other man. "But the Silverhorn is a working cattle ranch, not a gentleman's farm. The work is from dawn to dusk, rain or shine." "I understand that," Eleanor insisted. "And I'm willing to work as hard as any man Mr. Hayes employs." The bartender studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral, miss. The ranch is due north, following the creek, can't miss it. Big white house on the hill, barns in the valley." "Jackson's been in a foul mood since the 2 hands left," added another man, nursing a beer. His sister Abigail's been helping manage things, but they're behind on the spring work. You might just catch him desperate enough to hire you." Eleanor nodded her thanks and turned to leave when the bartender called after her. "Word of advice, miss. Jackson Hayes is fair, but he doesn't suffer fools. If you're not what you claim to be, he'll know it within 5 minutes." The warning followed. Eleanor, as she left the saloon, she'd been raised to manage household staff, make conversation with dignitaries, and navigate complex social hierarchies. But actual labor, the closest she'd come was arranging flowers from the garden or helping her lady's maid select her outfits. She needed to learn, and quickly. Returning to Mrs. Wilson's store, Eleanor purchased a book on animal husbandry and basic farming techniques with some of her precious savings. She spent the remainder of the day and most of the night reading by candlelight, committing terms and processes to memory. The next morning, Eleanor rose before dawn and dressed in the sturdiest clothes she had brought. A simple skirt, blouse, and boots that had been part of her disguise. She braided her chestnut hair tightly and tucked it under a wide-brimmed hat purchased from Mrs. Wilson. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Taking breakfast with you?" Mrs. Wilson asked when Eleanor came downstairs. "Yes, please. I'm heading to the Silverhorn today." Mrs. Wilson wrapped bread, cheese, and an apple in a cloth. "Jackson Hayes is a good man, but he's been through hardship. Lost his parents young, raised his sister alone, built that ranch from nearly nothing. He doesn't trust easily." "I'll remember that," Eleanor said, tucking the food into her small pack. The walk to the Silverhorn Ranch took nearly 2 hours. As the bartender had said, it was impossible to miss. A sprawling operation nestled in a verdant valley with a stately white farmhouse overlooking pastures and corrals filled with cattle and horses. Even to Eleanor's untrained eye, it was impressive. Her confidence wavered as she approached the main house. What did she know of ranch work, of early mornings and calloused hands, of a life where dinner wasn't served on fine china by uniformed staff? "Can I help you?" A female voice interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor turned to see a young woman about her age, approaching from the direction of the stables. She had dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wore men's trousers and a work shirt, something Eleanor found scandalous and enviable all at once. "I'm looking for Mr. Hayes," Eleanor replied. "I heard he's hiring." The woman looked her up and down, making no attempt to hide her skepticism. "You heard wrong. We need experienced hands, not—" She gestured vaguely at Eleanor's appearance. Eleanor straightened her spine, channeling the posture her finishing school instructors had drilled into her. "I may not look it, but I'm a hard worker. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania." "Did you now?" The woman crossed her arms. "What kind of farm?" "Mixed farming," Eleanor said, recalling her reading. "Crops and some livestock." "What crops?" "Wheat, primarily, and corn." Eleanor held the woman's gaze, praying her answers sounded authentic. After a long moment, the woman's expression softened slightly. "I'm Abigail Hayes. Jackson's my brother." She jerked her head toward the barn. "He's in there, but fair warning, he's in no mood for charity cases. I'm not looking for charity, Miss Hayes, just honest work." Abigail's lips quivered in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "We'll see about that." Eleanor followed her toward the large barn, heart pounding in her chest. Through the wide doors, she could see a man working with a chestnut mare in the center aisle. His back was to them, broad-shouldered, clad in a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "Jackson," Abigail called. "Someone here to see you." The man turned, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. Jackson Hayes was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a strong jawline shadowed by stubble and eyes the color of a stormy sky. Those eyes narrowed as they took in Eleanor's appearance. "We don't need household help," he said abruptly, turning back to the horse. "I'm not here for household work," Eleanor replied, stepping forward. "I'm here about the farmhand position." That got his attention. Jackson turned fully toward her, handing the horse's lead rope to Abigail. He approached Eleanor, his gaze intense and assessing. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, looking between her and his sister. "No, sir," Eleanor said firmly. "My name is Ellie Smith. I have experience with farm work, and I'm willing to learn whatever I don't already know." Jackson crossed his arms, mirroring his sister's earlier posture. "Farm work like what?" "Animal husbandry, planting, harvesting," Eleanor recited, grateful for her night of studying. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Hayes." "Have you ever mucked out a stall, Miss Smith? Helped birth a calf? Mended fences in freezing rain?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "Not exactly those things, no. But I'm a fast learner." A muscle ticked in Jackson's jaw. "This isn't finishing school, Miss Smith. People get hurt here if they don't know what they're doing. I need hands who can pull their weight from day one." "Give me a chance to prove myself," Eleanor insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. If she couldn't secure this position, her options in Willow Creek were limited. "1 week. If I'm not useful by then, I'll leave without argument." Jackson studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to Abigail. "What do you think?" Abigail shrugged. "We're short-handed, and she did walk all the way from town." Another moment of silence stretched between them before Jackson nodded curtly. "1 week, Miss Smith. You'll bunk in the cabin by the cookhouse with Rosa, our cook. Workday starts at 5. Abigail will show you the ropes." He turned away, clearly considering the matter settled. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said to him. "You won't regret it." Jackson glanced over his shoulder, his expression skeptical. "We'll see about that." As Abigail led her toward the cookhouse, Eleanor felt a mixture of triumph and terror. She had secured a position, yes, but now she actually had to perform work she knew nothing about, and she had to do it under the watchful eye of Jackson Hayes, a man who clearly suffered no pretense. "Hope you're as tough as you think you are," Abigail said as they crossed the yard. "My brother's fair, but he has no patience for people who can't keep up." "I'll keep up," Eleanor promised, though she had no idea how. Abigail paused, turning to face her fully. "There's something odd about you, Ellie Smith. You don't talk like any farm girl I've ever met." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "I had a good education." Abigail didn't look convinced. "Well, whatever your story is, it's your business. But if you hurt my brother or this ranch, you'll answer me." "Understood." The threat was clear, and Eleanor nodded. Perfectly. What had she gotten herself into? As they continued toward the cookhouse where she would meet Rosa and settle into her new accommodations, Eleanor found herself wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. She knew nothing of this life, these people, this work, but looking back at the main house, with Jackson Hayes now visible on the porch watching them cross the yard, she felt something unexpected, a thrill of challenge, of possibility. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Sinclair would be judged not for her family name or fortune, but for what she could accomplish with her own 2 hands. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was only the beginning. The cabin Eleanor would share with Rosa was small but tidy, with 2 narrow beds, a pot-bellied stove, and a rough-hewn table beneath the single window. Rosa Martinez, the ranch cook, was a middle-aged woman with laugh lines around her eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Eleanor of her childhood nanny. "So you're the city girl playing cowhand," Rosa said, eyeing Eleanor as she set down her satchel. "Jackson must be desperate." "I'm not playing at anything," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice level despite her fatigue from the long walk. "And I'm not from the city. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania." Rosa's dark eyes narrowed skeptically. "Your hands say otherwise." She gestured to Eleanor's palms, which despite her best efforts still bore the softness of privilege. But it doesn't matter. We all have our stories. She returned to kneading dough at the small table. You can take that bed by the window. Supper's at 7 in the cookhouse. Don't be late. Jackson doesn't tolerate tardiness. Eleanor unpacked her meager belongings, carefully tucking her mother's locket, the one luxury she'd allowed herself to bring, beneath her pillow. Her body ached from the unaccustomed exertion of the day, and tomorrow promised to be infinitely more challenging. Sleep proved elusive that night, despite her exhaustion. The unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, cattle, lowing in the distance, the creak of the cabin settling, Rosa's soft snoring kept Eleanor alert. By the time the roosters began their morning chorus, she'd barely managed a few hours of fitful rest. Rosa was already gone when Eleanor dragged herself from bed at 4:30. She splashed cold water on her face from the basin, dressed quickly, in her work clothes, and braided her hair with fingers still clumsy from sleep. The cookhouse was already bustling when she arrived. Ranch hands, all men of varying ages, sat at long tables, shoveling eggs and biscuits into their mouths as Rosa moved efficiently between the stove and serving counter. Conversation died as Eleanor entered, and she felt the weight of curious stares. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," drawled a tall, lanky cowboy with a shock of red hair. "Hayes must be getting desperate if he's hiring ladies now." "Shut it, Tucker," said an older man with gray-streaked hair. "Girls got as much right to work as anybody." He nodded toward an empty spot on the bench. "Sit down, miss. Rosa's breakfast. We'll put some strength in those arms. You'll need it." Eleanor nodded gratefully and took the offered seat. "Thank you, Mr. Miller." Frank Miller, been foreman at the Silverhorn going on 15 years. He studied her with shrewd eyes. "Boss says you claim to know farm work. That true?" Eleanor hesitated, then settled for a half-truth. "I helped with the lighter work on my family's farm. I have a lot to learn about ranching." Miller grunted. "At least you're honest about that much. You'll shadow Abigail today. She'll show you the ropes." He stood, addressing the room. "All right, you lazy bunch. Sun's almost up. Tyler Jenkins, North Pasture needs fencing. Martinez and Wilson, check the herd in the South Valley. Doc's coming at noon to look at those calves." The men dispersed quickly, leaving Eleanor alone at the table. She hurriedly finished her breakfast and stepped outside into the pre-dawn chill where Abigail was waiting, arms crossed. "Sleep well, farm girl?" Abigail asked, one eyebrow raised. "Like a baby," Eleanor lied, straightening her shoulders. Abigail smirked. "Sure you did. Come on, we start with the horses." The morning passed in a blur of new experiences, each more challenging than the last. Eleanor learned to muck stalls and promptly ruined her only pair of work boots, attempted to groom a particularly fractious mare who stepped on her foot, and struggled to carry buckets of water from the well, sloshing half of it down her front in the process. By midday, she was filthy, aching, and fighting tears of frustration. Her hands, unused to labor, were already developing blisters, and her back screamed in protest with every movement. "You're doing it wrong," came a deep voice from behind her as she wrestled with a hay bale, trying to break it apart for the horses' midday feeding. Eleanor turned to find Jackson Hayes watching her, his expression unreadable. Up close, she noted details she'd missed yesterday: a small scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the sun-weathered creases at the corners of his eyes, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. "Show me then," she said, unable to keep a note of challenge. From her voice, despite her exhaustion, something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her tone. Without a word, he moved beside her and demonstrated the proper technique, his movements efficient and practiced. "Like this. Let the tool do the work, not your back." Eleanor mirrored his actions, relieved when the hay separated more easily. "Thank you." Jackson studied her for a moment. "Your hands are bleeding." Eleanor glanced down. Indeed, her palms were raw, with small smears of blood on her work gloves. "It's nothing. It's something if it affects your work," he countered. "Go. See Rosa. She'll have a salve. Be back in 10 minutes. It wasn't a concern, Eleanor realized as she walked toward the cookhouse. It was practical. An injured worker was an inefficient one. Nevertheless, Rosa's gentle ministrations as she applied salve to Eleanor's hands provided a moment of respite. "First day is always the hardest," the cook said, her tone softer than it had been the night before. "The blisters will callous over eventually. If I last that long," Eleanor murmured. Rosa gave her a shrewd look. "Why are you really here, girl? Pretty thing like you could find easier work in town." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I have my reasons. Don't we all?" Rosa wrapped clean strips of cloth around Eleanor's palms. "There, now get back to work before Jackson thinks you're shirking." The afternoon brought new challenges, learning to repair a section of fence under Frank Miller's watchful eye, helping Abigail doctor a sick calf, and assisting Rosa with meal preparations for the ranch hands. By the time supper was served, Eleanor could barely keep her eyes open. She ate mechanically, too tired even to register the taste of the hearty stew Rosa placed before her. "Are you still alive over there, Princess?" The red-headed cowboy, Tucker, called from across the table. "Thought for sure you'd have run back to town by now." Eleanor summoned the last of her energy to lift her head. "Sorry to disappoint you, Mr. Tucker. I'll try harder to fail tomorrow." A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the bunkhouse, and even Tucker's mouth twitched unwillingly. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that," said another hand, a young man barely out of his teens. Eleanor was too exhausted to acknowledge the compliment. As soon as she finished eating, she stumbled back to the cabin and collapsed onto her bed, not even bothering to remove her boots. The following days fell into a punishing rhythm. Rise before dawn, work until dark, fall into bed, repeat. Eleanor's body protested every moment, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, tasks became marginally easier. Her hands began to harden, her muscles strengthened, and she learned to move with more efficiency. On her 4th day at the Silverhorn, disaster struck. Eleanor was helping Abigail move a small group of heifers from one pasture to another when a rattlesnake spooked the animals. The cattle bolted, with one panicked heifer charging directly at Eleanor. She froze, her mind blank with terror. At the last possible moment, a strong arm yanked her aside as a horse thundered past. The heifer swerved, rejoining the others as they stampeded toward the far end of the pasture. Eleanor found herself pressed against Jackson Hayes's chest, his arms still around her waist. His heart hammered against her cheek, matching the frantic pace of her own. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, setting her away from him to examine her face. "And no," she stammered, legs trembling beneath her. "What were you thinking?" His voice was harsh with what she realized belatedly was fear. "You never stand still when cattle are spooked." "Never." "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. I didn't know what to do." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, visibly collecting himself. "Of course you didn't. Because you've never worked with cattle before, have you?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Eleanor opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came. She couldn't perpetuate the lie, not when her ignorance had nearly gotten her killed. "I thought so." His voice was quiet now, and somehow that was worse than his anger. "Go back to the house. We'll discuss your future at the Silverhorn after. I round up those heifers." Shame burned through Eleanor as she walked back toward the main house. She had failed. After less than a week, her charade was crumbling around her. To her surprise, she found Abigail waiting on the porch, a medical kit beside her. "Jackson sent word you might need looking after," Abigail explained, gesturing for Eleanor to sit beside her. "He tends to bark when he's worried." "He has every right to be angry," Eleanor said, sinking gratefully onto the porch step. "I could have caused serious trouble." Abigail examined a scrape on Eleanor's arm, cleaning it with gentle efficiency. Everybody makes mistakes when they're learning. The question is whether you learn from them. Eleanor looked at her in surprise. You're not going to tell me I don't belong here? Would it matter if I did? Abigail applied a bandage to the scrape. You're stubborn enough to stay anyway, I suspect. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling slightly. Perhaps. Abigail studied her for a long moment. You know, for someone who claims to have grown up on a farm, you sure do approach everything like it's the first time you've seen it. Eleanor's smile faded. I suppose I wasn't very convincing. No, Abigail agreed. Bluntly, you weren't. So why don't you tell me who you really are, Ellie Smith, if that's even your name? The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Eleanor could continue the lie, or she could trust someone with at least part of the truth. My name is Ellie, she said finally, but I didn't grow up on a farm. I came west to start over. Running from something? Abigail's eyes were kind but perceptive. Someone, Eleanor admitted. My father arranged a marriage for me, to a man I couldn't bear to be tied to. Abigail nodded slowly. That, at least, has the ring of truth to it. She closed the medical kit with a decisive snap. Look, I don't care where you came from, but if you're going to stay here, you need to be honest about what you don't know before someone gets hurt. Your brother will send me away, Eleanor said quietly. Maybe, maybe not. Abigail stood. Jackson's fair, and we still need help. She offered Eleanor a hand up. Come on. I'll teach you how to properly approach cattle so you don't get yourself killed next time. By the time Jackson returned several hours later, Eleanor had received an intensive education in livestock behavior from Abigail. Her pride was still bruised, but at least she felt marginally more prepared. She was helping Rosa prepare supper when Jackson appeared in the cookhouse doorway, his expression grim. Miss Smith. A word. Eleanor wiped her hands on a towel and followed, him outside, bracing herself for dismissal. They walked in silence to a small rise overlooking the ranch, where Jackson finally turned to face her. Abigail tells me she's been giving you proper training this afternoon, he began. Yes, sir. She also tells me you admitted to having no farm experience. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. That's correct. I lied about my background, and I apologize. It was wrong of me to misrepresent myself. Jackson studied her, his grey eyes, inscrutable in the fading light. Why did you do it? Because I needed work, and because I wanted... Eleanor hesitated. I wanted to prove I could do something real, something that mattered. So this is some kind of adventure for you? Slumming, with the working folk before you returned to whatever comfortable life you left behind? The accusation stung, partly because it contained a grain of truth. No, she said firmly, I'm not going back. Ever. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Jackson's expression softened marginally. Abigail seems to think you're worth keeping on despite your deception. Hope flickered in Eleanor's chest. And what do you think, Mr. Hayes? I think you're the most stubborn, impractical woman I've ever met. His mouth twitched. But I admire your determination. God knows we need the help, and you've worked harder than I expected, given your background. Does that mean I can stay? Jackson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Conditional on you being honest about your limitations and learning the proper way to do things. No more pretending you know things you don't. Relief flooded through Eleanor. Thank you, I promise I won't let you down. See that you don't. His tone was gruff, but Eleanor caught a glimmer of something almost like respect in his eyes. Now get back to helping Rosa before she comes after both of us with a rolling pin. As she hurried back to the cookhouse, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in days, despite her aching muscles and scratched hands. She had been given a second chance, and she wouldn't waste it. That night, after supper, she found herself lingering on the porch of her cabin, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. The vast openness of the ranch, so different from the confines of Boston society, felt like freedom. Beautiful, isn't it? Jackson's voice startled her. He stood a few feet away, his figure silhouetted against the last glow of sunset. Yes, Eleanor agreed softly. I never saw stars like this back home. Too many lights. Jackson moved closer, leaning against the porch railing. Where is home, exactly? Since we're being honest now. Eleanor hesitated. East, she said vaguely. A place where my life was planned out for me since birth, and you didn't like the plan? I didn't like being a chess piece in someone else's game. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Jackson was quiet for a moment. My father used to say we're all playing a game. The trick is figuring out whether you're a player or a piece. And which are you, Mr. Hayes? He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Out here I make my own rules. He straightened, preparing to leave. Get some rest, Miss Smith. Tomorrow I'm going to teach you to ride properly. Can't have my farmhands walking everywhere. As he walked away, Eleanor called after him. Jackson? He paused, turning back, and she smiled. Thank you for the second chance. He nodded once, then continued toward the main house, his stride long and confident in the gathering darkness. Eleanor remained on the porch, contemplating the unexpected turn her life had taken. 1 week ago, she had been Eleanor Sinclair, railroad, heiress and society darling. Now she was Ellie Smith, ranch hand, and what? Not quite a friend, not quite accepted, but no longer completely an outsider. For the first time since arriving at the Silverhorn, she allowed herself to acknowledge the flutter in her chest whenever Jackson Hayes was near. It was foolish of course. He was her employer, and she was living a lie. Even if he had begun to accept her as a worker, there could never be anything more between them. Besides, what would a man like Jackson Hayes want with a woman who couldn't even face a charging heifer without freezing in terror? No, Eleanor reminded herself firmly. She hadn't come west for romance. She had come for freedom, for the chance to define herself on her own terms. Still, as she finally went inside to prepare for bed, she couldn't help but remember the solid strength of Jackson's arm around her waist, the concern in his eyes as he'd asked if she was hurt, the unexpected gentleness in his voice as he'd spoken of stars and rules and chances. Dangerous thoughts for a woman with secrets. The following weeks brought a transformation in Eleanor that went beyond her increasingly calloused hands and sun-bronzed skin. Under Jackson and Abigail's tutelage, she learned to ride with confidence, to anticipate the needs of the livestock, and to perform the countless tasks that kept the Silverhorn running. Her first successful day on horseback had been a revelation. After several false starts and one undignified tumble into a mud puddle that had Tucker howling with laughter, Eleanor had finally found her balance astride a gentle mare named Daisy. Not bad for a beginner, Jackson had commented, watching her complete a circuit of the corral. You've got a natural seat. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her, and Eleanor had treasured it absurdly. As April gave way to May, spring work intensified. The days grew longer, filled with cattle drives to summer pastures, repairs to fences and buildings damaged by winter weather, and preparation for the upcoming calving season. Eleanor threw herself into every task, determined to earn her place. You're catching on quicker than I expected, Frank Miller told her one evening as they returned from mending a section of fence in the north pasture. Most greenhorns take twice. As long to get half as good, Eleanor smiled, warmed by the foreman's grudging approval. I have good teachers. That you do, Miller agreed, adjusting his hat against the setting sun. The boss has been spending more time with you than he did with the last 3 hands combined. Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. Mr. Hayes is just ensuring I don't make costly mistakes. Miller gave her a knowing look, but said nothing further as they approached the ranch yard. The truth was more complicated than Eleanor cared to admit, even to herself. Jackson's attention had shifted from wary supervision to something more like partnership. He sought her opinion on ranch matters, included her in planning discussions, and occasionally shared stories of the Silverhorns' early days as they worked side by side. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek continued beyond the ranch boundaries. Her rare trips into town for supplies, Eleanor noticed whispers and curious glances following her progress down the main street. Her position at the Silverhorn had apparently become a subject of local interest. "The ladies at church are beside themselves with curiosity," Mrs. Wilson informed her during one such visit to the general store. "A young woman working as a ranch hand and staying out there with all those men. It's quite the scandal." "I stay with Rosa," Eleanor corrected, selecting pins and thread from a display. "And I'm hardly the first woman to do men's work." "Perhaps not, but you're certainly the first who looks like she stepped out of a Boston finishing school." Mrs. Wilson's shrewd eyes studied her. "No matter how you've roughened those hands of yours." Eleanor stiffened. "I don't know what you—" "I mean, of course you don't, dear." Mrs. Wilson's smile was kind but knowing. "Your secret's safe with me, whatever it may be, though I suspect Jackson Hayes might take more interest if he knew." "There's nothing for Mr. Hayes to know," Eleanor insisted, gathering her purchases. "And nothing between us beyond an employer-employee relationship, if you say so." Mrs. Wilson handed over her change. "But a word of advice from someone who's seen her share of life. Secrets have a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient times." The warning followed Eleanor back to the Silverhorn, an unwelcome reminder of the precariousness of her position. She had built a life here, a genuine life with honest work and growing friendships, yet it all rested on the foundation of a lie. What would happen when Jackson discovered her true identity? The question haunted her increasingly as their relationship deepened. One evening in late May, Eleanor was brushing down Daisy after a long day checking fences when Jackson appeared in the stable doorway. "I've been looking for you," he said, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something I'd like to show you if you have time." Curious, Eleanor followed him to the small paddock behind the main barn where a sleek black gelding stood watching them approach. "This is Midnight," Jackson said, reaching out to stroke the horse's gleaming neck. "I've been training him since winter." "He's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, admiring the animal's powerful lines. "He's yours if you want him." Eleanor's head snapped up in surprise. "Mine, but I couldn't possibly—" "You've earned it," Jackson interrupted. "Every hand needs their own mount, and you've proven yourself these past weeks." His eyes met hers, unusually earnest. "I was wrong about you, Ellie. You belong here." The simple acceptance in his words struck Eleanor with unexpected force. She belonged here. Here, where no one cared about her family name or fortune. Here, where her worth was measured by skill and determination rather than social standing. Here, with this man whose approval had come to mean more than she'd ever anticipated. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." Jackson's mouth curved in a rare, full smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to breathtaking. "You could say you'll join me for supper in town. Tomorrow night, the Willow Creek Spring Festival is starting, and Abigail insists we all need a night off." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Like a social engagement. Like a chance to eat food Rosa didn't cook and maybe hear some music that isn't Tucker's off-key warbling." Jackson's tone was light, but something in his eyes suggested the invitation held deeper significance. "I'd like that," Eleanor said softly. Jackson nodded, looking pleased. "Good. We'll ride in after the day's work is done." He hesitated, then added, "Abigail mentioned you might need something different to wear. She said to tell you to come by the house tomorrow morning. Apparently, she has dresses from when she used to attend such things." The thought of wearing a dress again after weeks in practical work clothes was oddly discomforting. "That's very kind of her. Don't feel obligated." Jackson said quickly, misreading her hesitation. "No one expects you to turn into a society lady." Eleanor bit back a hysterical laugh at the irony. If only he knew what she really was. "I'll speak with Abigail," she promised. "And thank you for Midnight. He's the finest gift I've ever received." It wasn't even a lie. Her father's lavish presents, jewels, gowns, even her own carriage on her 18th birthday, had been expressions of possession rather than appreciation. This horse represented something far more valuable: respect. The following morning, Eleanor rose earlier than usual and made her way to the main house. Abigail answered her knock, already dressed for the day's work, but with her hair still loose around her shoulders. "Finally," she said with a grin, pulling Eleanor inside. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming." "You didn't have to do this," Eleanor began, but Abigail waved away her protest. "Please, I've been looking for an excuse to drag these out for ages." She led Eleanor upstairs to a sunlit bedroom and threw open a wardrobe to reveal several dresses. "They're a bit outdated, but no one in Willow Creek will notice or care." The garments were indeed simpler than what Eleanor had worn in Boston, but beautifully made, and in much better condition than anything in her current wardrobe. She ran her fingers over a blue cotton dress with delicate white piping. "This is lovely. Try it on," Abigail urged, moving toward the door. "I'll give you privacy." "No need," Eleanor said without thinking. "I'm used to dressing with Rosa in the cabin." Abigail paused. "If you're sure." As Eleanor slipped out of her work clothes, she was acutely aware of Abigail's curious gaze. Her body had changed in her weeks at the Silverhorn. Her arms and shoulders were more defined, her waist still slim, but her overall frame stronger and more solid. "You have interesting scars for a farm girl," Abigail commented as Eleanor removed her shirt, revealing a small mark on her shoulder. Eleanor froze. The scar was from a smallpox vaccination, a treatment her father had insisted upon after an outbreak among the railroad workers had nearly reached their neighborhood. Such medical care would have been rare in the farming community, she claimed to come from. "Childhood accident," she said vaguely, quickly pulling the blue dress over her head. "How does it look?" Abigail stepped forward to help with the buttons, her expression thoughtful. "It suits you, though I suspect Jackson would approve of you in a flour sack at this point." Eleanor's cheeks warmed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Abigail's voice softened. "My brother hasn't looked at anyone that way since Catherine died." "Catherine?" Eleanor stilled beneath Abigail's hands. Abigail sighed. "His fiancée. 6 years ago now. Influenza took her just weeks before their wedding." She finished the last button and stepped back. "He closed himself off after that, threw himself into building the ranch, shut out everything else, until recently." Eleanor digested this new information, understanding better now the shadows she sometimes glimpsed in Jackson's eyes. "I'm not looking to replace anyone," she said carefully. "No one's asking you to." Abigail moved to a small jewelry box on her dresser. "But you make him smile again, and that's worth something." She removed a simple silver necklace with a small blue stone pendant. "Here, to complete the outfit." As Abigail fastened the necklace around her throat, Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. She was accepting these kindnesses, Jackson's trust, Abigail's friendship, all while concealing her true identity. But what choice did she have? If they knew who she really was, who her father was, everything would change. Jackson Hayes might admire Ellie Smith, hard-working ranch hand, but Eleanor Sinclair, railroad heiress, the daughter of the man whose aggressive expansion had driven countless small ranchers from their land. The festival in Willow Creek was a modest affair by Boston standards, but Eleanor found herself enchanted by its authentic cheer. Lanterns hung from trees in the town square, tables groaned with homemade dishes, and a small band played lively tunes as couples danced on a wooden platform erected for the occasion. Jackson had been quiet on the ride into town, casting occasional glances her way that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. Now, as they moved through the crowd, his hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a gesture both protective and possessive that drew curious looks from the townspeople. "Everyone's staring," Eleanor murmured as they collected plates of food. "From the communal tables. You can hardly blame them," Jackson replied, his eyes warm as they took in her appearance. "You clean up pretty well for a ranch hand." "As do you," she returned, admiring how his usual work clothes had been replaced by a clean shirt and vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd shaved for the occasion, revealing the strong line of his jaw. They found seats at a table with Frank Miller and his wife, a cheerful woman who immediately engaged Eleanor in conversation. As they ate, Eleanor gradually relaxed, enjoying the simple pleasure of good food and company without the rigid protocols of Boston society dinners. "Would you care to dance?" Jackson asked as the band struck up a waltz. Eleanor hesitated. Dancing was one of the few social skills from her previous life that might betray her. A true farm girl would be unlikely to know the formal steps. "I'm not very good," she hedged. "Neither am I," Jackson admitted with a rueful smile. "But I promise not to complain if you step on my toes." She couldn't refuse the warmth in his eyes. Taking his offered hand, Eleanor allowed him to lead her to the dance floor, where she carefully moderated her steps to appear less practiced than she was. Jackson's hand was warm at her waist, his other gently holding hers as they moved among the other couples. For all his claims to the contrary, he danced well, guiding her with the same quiet confidence he displayed in all things. "You're full of surprises, Ellie Smith," he murmured as they turned. "Every time I think I have you figured out, you show me something new." Eleanor's stomach tightened with apprehension. "What do you mean?" "You carry yourself differently tonight, almost like—" He trailed off, his gaze searching her face. "Like what?" she prompted, heart racing. Before he could answer, the music ended, and they were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Wilson, beaming at them both. "What a lovely couple you make," the shopkeeper said, her eyes twinkling. "Jackson, you won't. Mind if I steal Miss Smith for a moment, will you? The ladies have been dying to meet her properly." Before either could protest, Eleanor found herself whisked away to a group of women who immediately enfolded her in a flurry of questions and observations about life at the Silverhorn. By the time she extracted herself, Jackson had been drawn into conversation with several local businessmen. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, but swiftly, with little opportunity for private conversation. As they prepared to return to the ranch, however, Jackson suggested a detour. "The view from Miller's Ridge is worth seeing on a night like this," he said, nodding toward the full moon that had risen over the town. "If you're not too tired." Eleanor agreed readily, curious and a little nervous about what he might have to say away from prying eyes and ears. The ridge overlooked the valley where Willow Creek nestled, its buildings now mere pinpricks of light in the darkness. Above, stars blanketed the sky in dazzling profusion, while the moon cast the landscape in silver. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed as they dismounted. "Yes," Jackson agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking not at the view, but at her. He stepped closer, his expression intent. "Ellie, there's something I need to ask you." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Yes? Who are you? Really?" The question struck her like a physical blow. "What do you mean? I'm Ellie Smith. You know that." Jackson shook his head slowly. "No, I don't think I do." He gestured to her hands. "Those were never a farm girl's hands. Not originally. Your speech, your manners, even the way you sometimes catch yourself like you're stopping from saying something that would give you away." His voice remained gentle, but his eyes were piercing. "I've been patient, hoping you'd trust me enough to tell me the truth. But I need to know who I'm—" He paused, seemingly searching for the right word. who I'm going to care for. Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was the moment she had both dreaded and, in some secret corner of her heart, longed for. The chance to be honest, to be known, but the risk was enormous. Once spoken, the truth could never be reclaimed. She began, then faltered, torn between fear and the desperate desire to unburden herself. Jackson waited, his expression open and expectant in the moonlight. "My name is Eleanor," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor. Sinclair. Recognition flickered in Jackson's eyes, and Eleanor's heart sank. Of course he would know the name. Everyone in the West knew the Sinclair Railroad Empire. "William Sinclair's daughter?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "The railroad magnate?" Eleanor nodded miserably. "I ran away. My father arranged a marriage for me to the son of his business partner. A merger of fortunes, essentially. I couldn't bear it, so you came west." Jackson's tone gave nothing away. "And ended up at my ranch by chance?" "Complete chance," Eleanor confirmed quickly. "I chose Willow Creek randomly. I had no idea whose ranch I was applying to work at." Jackson was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable in the moonlight. Finally he spoke. "Why maintain the deception for so long? Why not tell me who you were once you knew you could trust me?" The hurt beneath the question was unmistakable, and Eleanor felt shame wash over her. At first, it was survival. "I needed a work, and I knew no one would hire William Sinclair's daughter as a ranch hand." She took a deep breath. "But later it was fear. Fear that you would see me differently. That I would become Eleanor Sinclair again, instead of just Ellie." "And which are you?" Jackson asked quietly. "Eleanor or Ellie?" "Both." "Neither." She shook her head in frustration. "I don't know anymore. The person I was in Boston feels like a stranger now. But Ellie Smith was built on lies." Jackson stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "The woman who works from dawn to dusk without complaint, who's earned the respect of every hand on the Silverhorn, who treats everyone from Rosa to the lowest ranch hand with dignity. That woman isn't a lie." Hope fluttered in Eleanor's chest. "You're not angry?" "I'm processing," Jackson admitted. "The daughter of William Sinclair mucking out stalls on my ranch is a lot to take in." A hint of his usual wry smile appeared. "Though it explains why you screamed the first time you saw a mouse in the barn." Despite everything, Eleanor found herself laughing shakily. "I maintain that was a perfectly reasonable response to a creature launching itself at my face." Jackson's smile widened but quickly faded. "Does your father know where you are?" "No," Eleanor said firmly, "and he can't find out. Jackson, you don't understand what he's like. If he discovered where I am, he would drag me back to Boston and in that marriage by force, if necessary." As she spoke, a distant memory surfaced. Jackson's earlier conversation with the businessman in town, their serious expressions as they spoke in low voices. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. "What is it?" Jackson asked, noting her sudden change in expression. "Those men you were speaking with at the festival," Eleanor said slowly. "What were you discussing?" Jackson's hesitation told her everything. Before he even spoke, "There are rumors that Sinclair Railways is planning to extend a line through this valley. The businessmen in town are divided. Some see opportunity, others—" He trailed off. "Others see the destruction my father's railways have bought elsewhere," Eleanor finished for him. "The small ranches forced to sell, the towns that resisted disappearing from maps." "Yes." Jackson's honesty was unflinching. "Your father's methods are well known." The full implications hit Eleanor like a thunderbolt. "That's why you were so interested in who I really am. You thought I might be here on my father's behalf, spying." The flicker in Jackson's eyes confirmed her suspicion, and pain lanced through her. "Can you blame me for wondering?" he asked quietly. "The coincidence seemed too perfect when I heard the rumors." "And now?" Eleanor challenged, anger mingling with her hurt. "Do you still think I'm my father's puppet?" Jackson reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I think you're the most stubbornly independent woman I've ever met. No one's puppet." His fingers tightened around hers. "But Eleanor, if these rumors are true, we're all in trouble, especially you. If your father is coming here, you're hiding. Her place won't stay secret for long." The realization settled over Eleanor like a physical weight. Her carefully constructed new life was in danger, threatened by the very man she'd fled, and yet, standing here with Jackson beneath the vast Colorado sky, his hand warm around hers, she knew she couldn't run again. Not from this, not from him. Then, "We'll have to make sure the railway doesn't come through Willow Creek," she said with newfound determination. "And I know exactly how to do it." Jackson's eyebrows rose in surprise, but a slow smile spread across his face. The smile of a man, recognizing a worthy partner in the coming fight. "I'm listening," he said simply, and in that moment, Eleanor knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The ride back to the Silverhorn was filled with urgent conversation, as Eleanor explained what she knew of her father's expansion. Methods. "He always follows the same pattern," she told Jackson as their horses picked their way along the moonlit trail. "First come the surveyors, then land agents offering to buy at prices that seem generous, until people realize what they've lost. Those who refuse to sell find themselves facing mysterious problems, damaged fences, scattered livestock, dried up wells." Jackson's jaw tightened. "That's criminal." "It's business, according to my father." Eleanor's voice was bitter. "And nearly impossible to prove. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's too late. So we watch for surveyors," Jackson said, thinking aloud, "and warn people not to sell, no matter how good the offer sounds." Eleanor shook her head. "It won't be enough. My father employs men specifically to create divisions in communities like Willow Creek. He'll pit merchant against rancher, farmer against townspeople. He'll promise jobs, progress, prosperity, and deliver only for those who play by his rules." "Then, what do you suggest?" Jackson asked, his eyes reflecting starlight and determination in equal measure. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I need to examine the proposed route. Every railway has a weakness, a place where construction would be too difficult or expensive to justify. If we can identify that weakness and make sure my father's surveyors find it, we can divert the railway away from Willow Creek without confrontation," Jackson finished, impressed. "But how do we get that information?" "I have an idea," Eleanor said, "but you're not going to like it." Back at the ranch, they convened a midnight council in Jackson's study, a cozy room lined with books and maps that Eleanor had never seen before. Abigail joined them, her initial shock at Eleanor's true identity giving way to practical questions. "So you're saying we need to get our hands on the survey maps before they're finalized?" Abigail clarified, studying the topographical map of the valley that Jackson had spread across his desk. "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "Once we know the planned route, we can identify vulnerable points, places where a slight change in the survey could make the route through Willow Creek seem impractical compared to alternatives." "And how exactly do we get these maps?" Jackson asked, his expression skeptical. "Good," Eleanor said, her mind racing. The canyon was precisely the vulnerability she'd hoped to find, a place where suggestions of geological instability might divert the route away from Willow Creek. "I'd like copies of these preliminary maps for my report, if you don't mind." Harrington hesitated. "They're quite rough, Miss Sinclair. Perhaps when we've refined our findings—" "Mr. Harrington," Eleanor interrupted with ice in her tone, "my father expects thoroughness at every stage. I'm sure you wouldn't want me to report that you were uncooperative." The threat hung in the air between them. After a long moment, Harrington nodded to one of his juniors. "Make copies for Miss Sinclair, all of them." While the young surveyor hurried to comply, Eleanor maintained pleasant but probing conversation, extracting additional information about their timeline, methods, and instructions. By the time she left the silver dollar, with the precious maps tucked securely in her saddlebag, she had everything they needed, and a gnawing sense of urgency. The surveyors expected to complete their work within 2 weeks. After that, the land agents would arrive, beginning the systematic dismantling of Willow Creek's independence. Jackson was waiting at Mrs. Wilson's as arranged, pacing the back room with barely contained impatience. His face flooded with relief when Eleanor entered. "You got them?" he asked, gesturing to her saddlebag. "Yes," she confirmed, spreading the maps on Mrs. Wilson's table. "But we don't have much time." Mrs. Wilson locked the shop door and joined them, her expression grave. "Those men have been asking pointed questions about property values and water rights. They're laying the groundwork for what's coming." Jackson studied the maps intently, his finger tracing the route that would cut through his land. "So this is your father's plan. Take the most direct route, regardless of whose lives it disrupts." "It's worse than I feared," Eleanor admitted. "The route cuts through not just the Silverhorn, but also crosses Miller's Creek, where most of the smaller ranchers water their cattle. Without access to that water, they'd be forced to sell," Jackson finished grimly. "Clever. But the canyon here," Eleanor pointed to the narrow passage she'd questioned Harrington about, "that's our opportunity. If we can convince the survey team that it's geologically unstable, they'd have to recommend an alternate route," Mrs. Wilson concluded, catching on quickly. "But how do we do that?" "We need evidence," Eleanor said. "Geological reports, historical, accounts of instability, real or invented." Abigail's grandfather kept journals about the valley, Jackson recalled. He mentioned a significant rock slide in that area back in the 1830s. "If we could find those records, and I can speak with the tribal elders on the reservation," Mrs. Wilson added. "They have oral histories going back generations. If there was instability there, they'd know." Eleanor felt a surge of hope. "We need to work quickly. The survey will be complete in 2 weeks, and after that," she broke off as the shop door rattled, followed by an authoritative knock. Mrs. Wilson moved to answer it, then turned back with alarm in her eyes. "It's Mayor Phillips," she whispered. "With Mr. Harrington from the survey team." Jackson pulled Eleanor toward the back room. "They must have followed you. Go out the back way and head for the ranch. I'll distract them." "But no arguments," Jackson said firmly. "If they realize who you are and why you really wanted those maps, everything falls apart." Eleanor nodded reluctantly and slipped into the storeroom as Mrs. Wilson unbolted the front door. Through the crack in the door, she could see the shopkeeper, greeting the visitors with convincing surprise. "Mayor Phillips, what brings you so late?" "Mrs. Wilson," the mayor replied, his voice oily with false bonhomie. "This gentleman is from Sinclair Railways. He's looking for a young woman who may have visited your shop today." "I've had several customers," Mrs. Wilson replied vaguely. "Young and old." "This would be a well-spoken lady," Harrington clarified. "Elegant. She claimed to be William Sinclair's daughter." Eleanor's blood ran cold at the suspicion in his voice. She had thought her performance convincing, but clearly something had raised Harrington's doubts. "Ah," Mrs. Wilson said with perfectly feigned comprehension. "You must mean the young lady who stopped by earlier. She mentioned something about railroads, but I assumed she was just passing through." "Was she alone?" Harrington pressed. Before Mrs. Wilson could answer, Jackson stepped into view from where he'd been examining goods on a shelf. "Evening, Mayor. Harrington, is it? I'm Jackson Hayes. I believe we crossed paths at the Silver Dollar earlier." The casual way he inserted himself into the conversation suggested he'd merely been shopping when they arrived, not waiting for a clandestine meeting. "Mr. Hayes," the mayor acknowledged, surprise evident in his tone. "I wasn't aware you were acquainted with our visitors." "Just making introductions around town," Jackson replied easily. Willow Creek should put its best foot forward when progress comes calling, wouldn't you say? The calculated ambiguity of his response, neither endorsing nor opposing the railway, caught the mayor off guard. Yes, well, Mr. Harrington was just asking about a young woman who visited earlier. Perhaps you noticed her at the saloon. Can't say that I did, Jackson lied smoothly. I was discussing cattle prices with Jenkins most of the afternoon. He turned to Harrington. Something amiss with the lady in question? Harrington's expression was guarded. Just a matter of verification. She claimed a connection to our employer that seems questionable. Well, you know how people can be around these parts, Jackson said with a dismissive chuckle, always looking to seem more important than they are. If I hear anything, I'll be sure to let you know. The easy confidence of Jackson's manner seemed to reassure Harrington, who nodded reluctantly. Thank you. We're staying at the hotel if you recall anything helpful. After the men departed, Jackson waited a full 5 minutes before signaling Eleanor that it was safe to emerge. They're suspicious, he said without preamble. Someone must have questioned your story. Or my father sent instructions that mentioned nothing about his daughter being in the field, Eleanor suggested. Either way, my cover is compromised. Which means we need to move fast, Jackson concluded. Get those maps to Abigail tonight. I'll stay in town and see what else I can learn about their plans. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Jackson caught Eleanor's arm, his expression intense. Be careful riding back alone. If Harrington has men watching the roads, I'll take the creek trail, she assured him. No one will see me. Jackson nodded, but didn't release her arm. Instead, in a swift motion that took her by surprise, he pulled her close and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief but electric, conveying everything they hadn't yet put into words. For luck, he murmured as he drew back, his eyes holding hers. Eleanor touched her fingers to her lips, momentarily speechless. I'll see you back at the ranch, she finally managed, her voice unsteady. As she slipped out the back of Mrs. Wilson's shop and made her way to where midnight waited, Eleanor's mind raced with the dual challenges before her. Stopping her father's railway and protecting her newfound happiness with Jackson. For the first time in her life, she was fighting for something that truly mattered, and she was determined not to lose. Eleanor urged Midnight through the shadowy forest, following the narrow creek trail back to the Silverhorn. The path was treacherous in the darkness, roots and rocks threatening to catch the horse's hooves with every step, but she couldn't risk taking the main road. Not with Harrington's suspicions aroused, the precious maps rustled in her saddlebag with each of Midnight's careful strides. If she could get them to Abigail, they might still have a chance to divert the railway. But the encounter at Mrs. Wilson's shop had changed everything. Their timeline had just shrunk dramatically. A branch snapped somewhere to her left, and Eleanor reined in sharply, heart pounding. Had she been followed after all? She held her breath, straining to hear over the gentle burble of the creek and the soft nickering of her nervous horse. Nothing, just the normal sounds of the forest at night. She urged Midnight forward again, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The kiss Jackson had given her, impulsive, electric, kept returning to her thoughts, a bright spark amid growing shadows. What would happen when this was over? If they succeeded in stopping the railway, would she stay at the Silverhorn? And if they failed? Eleanor refused to consider failure. Too much was at stake, not just her own happiness, but the future of Willow Creek, the Silverhorn, and everyone who had welcomed her despite her deception. The trees thinned as she approached the ranch. Moonlight, silvering the rolling pastures. Lights still burned in the main house, despite the late hour. Abigail waiting up for news, no doubt. Eleanor directed Midnight toward the stable, planning to settle her mount before delivering the maps. As she dismounted in the stable yard, a figure emerged from the shadows of the barn. Eleanor stifled a scream, fumbling for the small knife she kept in her boot, another habit she'd acquired in her new life. "It's just me," came Rosa's reassuring voice. "Miss Abigail sent me to watch for you. There are strangers about." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What strangers?" "Two men rode in about an hour ago," Rosa explained, helping Eleanor unsaddle Midnight. "Asked to speak with Mr. Hayes. When Miss Abigail said he was in town, they started asking questions about the hands working here, especially any new ones." The cook's dark eyes fixed meaningfully on Eleanor. "Miss Abigail kept them talking in the house while she sent me to warn you." "They're looking for me," Eleanor realized with growing dread. "Did they say who they were?" "Claimed to be from the railway," Rosa confirmed. "But they had the look of men who solve problems with their fists, not their minds. Not surveyors, then. Something worse, the kind of men her father employed when legal means failed to achieve his aims. Enforcers, probably the same ones who would have been tasked with bringing her back to Boston if her whereabouts had been discovered." "We need to get the maps to Abigail," Eleanor said urgently, pulling them from her saddlebag. "And then I need to leave. If they're looking for me, everyone at the Silverhorn is in danger, as long as I'm here." Rosa's expression was troubled, but resolute. "Miss Abigail said you should come to the back door of the kitchen. She'll meet you there after the men leave." They settled Midnight quickly, then made their way toward the main house, keeping to the shadows. Through the parlor windows, Eleanor could see Abigail standing with her back to the fireplace, facing two men in dark suits who looked jarringly out of place amid the rustic furnishings of the Hayes home. "Go back to the cabin and pack your things," Rosa whispered as they reached the kitchen door. "I'll get these to Miss Abigail and tell her to meet you at the old line shack in Peterson's Woods." Eleanor hesitated, reluctant to part with the maps. After all, she'd risked to obtain them, but Rosa's steady gaze brooked no argument. "Go," the cook insisted. "Those men won't stay much longer, and you need to be gone before they start searching the property." With a nod, Eleanor pressed the maps into Rosa's capable hands and melted back into the darkness, making her way swiftly to the cabin she shared with the cook. Her few possessions took only moments to gather. A spare shirt, her mother's locket, the book on animal husbandry that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. As she was checking that the small amount of money she had left was secure in her boot, the cabin door burst open. Eleanor whirled to find one of the men from the main house filling the doorway, his expression triumphant. "Well, well," he drawled, his Boston accent incongruous in the rustic setting. "If it isn't the runaway heiress herself. Your father's been most concerned about your welfare, Miss Sinclair." Eleanor backed away, her gaze darting to the window behind her. "My father's concern begins and ends with his business interests, Mr. Campbell," the man supplied with a mocking tip of his hat. "Martin Campbell at your service, and your father has authorized me to bring you home by any means necessary." "I'm not going back," Eleanor stated flatly, calculating the distance to the window and her chances of slipping past him to the door. Campbell smiled unpleasantly. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter, though I must say you've led us on quite the chase, hiding as a common laborer. Your father will be most disturbed by how far you've fallen." "The only thing that's fallen is your chance of taking me anywhere," Eleanor retorted, edging closer to the window. "I'm not the same sheltered girl who left Boston." "So I see," Campbell remarked, his gaze taking in her worn work clothes and sturdy boots. "Nevertheless, you'll be returning with us tonight. Your father is waiting in Denver, most eager for a reunion." The news that her father was so close sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. William Sinclair rarely left Boston for business that could be conducted by subordinates. That he had come to Colorado himself spoke to his determination to reclaim his wayward daughter and secure his railway through Willow Creek. "And if I refuse?" Eleanor challenged, though she knew the answer. Campbell's smile vanished. "Don't make this difficult, Miss Sinclair. There doesn't need to be unpleasantness." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor remembered all too well her father's methods for dealing with opposition. If Campbell was here to collect her, His partner was likely ensuring the Hayes family's cooperation through similar intimidation. A sudden commotion outside drew Campbell's attention momentarily. Shouts from the direction of the main house followed by the sound of breaking glass. It was all the distraction Eleanor needed. In a swift motion that would have been impossible for the society lady she'd once been, she vaulted through the window, tucking into a roll as she hit the ground outside. Campbell's curse followed her as she sprinted toward the barn. She needed a horse, midnight if she could reach him, and then she needed to disappear into the maze of trials that crisscrossed the Silverhorn's vast acreage. The barn was dark and quiet, the horses shifting restlessly in their stalls as she slipped inside. Eleanor moved to Midnight's stall, whispering reassurances as she hastily threw on a blanket and bridle, foregoing the saddle for speed. She was leading the horse toward the back door of the barn when a voice stopped her cold. "Going somewhere, Eleanor?" She turned slowly to find the second man from the house, taller than Campbell, with hard eyes and a thin scar along his jawline, blocking her path. "I won't go back," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You can tell my father I died. If that makes your job easier." The man chuckled humorlessly. "Your old man doesn't accept failure, and he's got big plans for you and that fiancé of yours." "Gregory Thornton is not my fiancé," Eleanor spat, "and my father's plans mean nothing to me now." Strong words for a girl with nowhere to run. The man took a step closer, and Midnight shied nervously. "Your ranch owner friend is currently learning why crossing William Sinclair is a bad idea. You want to add to his troubles?" Fear for Jackson surged through Eleanor, momentarily overwhelming her own predicament. "What have you done to him?" "Nothing. Yet," the man said with calculated casualness, but his sisters got quite a temper, pulled a shotgun on Campbell's partner when he suggested the ranch might suffer mysterious accidents if Hayes didn't cooperate in finding you. He shook his head in mock regret. Assaulting a railway representative, that's serious business, could lose her land over something like that. It was a trap, Eleanor realized, leverage to ensure her compliance. She had no way of knowing if Abigail had actually threatened anyone, but it didn't matter. The mere accusation, backed by her father's influence, could be disastrous for the Hayes family. "What do you want?" she asked, though she already knew. "Come quietly. No more running. Your father meets us in Denver, and everyone here gets to keep their pretty ranch." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Simple transaction. Eleanor's mind raced. If she surrendered now, her father would force her back to Boston, into marriage with Gregory Thornton, and the railway would plow through Willow Creek regardless of the damage it caused. Her sacrifice would ultimately save nothing, but if she refused and tried to escape, Jackson and Abigail would pay the price. "I want to see Jackson first," she said, playing for time. "I want to hear from him that he's unharmed and that you'll leave the Silverhorn alone if I cooperate." The man considered for a moment, then nodded. "Reasonable enough. We'll all take a nice walk up to the main house together." He held out his hand for Midnight's reins. "No tricks, Miss Sinclair. My associate Campbell has a tendency to shoot first. When he's annoyed," Eleanor reluctantly handed over the reins, her gaze scanning the barn for anything that might serve as a weapon or distraction. Nothing presented itself. She would have to bide her time and hope for an opportunity between here and the main house. As they stepped outside, a rifle shot cracked through the night, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. The man grabbed Eleanor's arm, instinctively pulling her behind him as he drew his own weapon. "Campbell," he called, scanning the darkness. No answer came, but Eleanor spotted movement at the edge of the ranch yard, a figure darting between outbuildings. "Keeping low. Looks like your friends have other ideas about our arrangement," the man growled, tightening his grip on her arm. "Let's move." He began dragging her toward the main house, using her as a shield against whoever was out there. Eleanor stumbled, deliberately making herself a difficult burden, buying time for whoever was approaching. Another shot rang out, closer this time, splintering wood just inches from them. The man cursed and changed direction, heading for the cover of a nearby storage shed. "Hayes!" he shouted into the darkness. "I've got the girl. You want her in one piece, you'll back off." "Let her go, Delaney," came Jackson's voice from somewhere to their left. "This doesn't have to get messy." "It's already messy," the man, Delaney, retorted. "Your girlfriend here belongs to William Sinclair, and he wants her back." "I belong to no one," Eleanor hissed, choosing that moment to drive her elbow hard into Delaney's ribs. He grunted in pain but maintained his grip, twisting her arm behind her back until she gasped. "Bad move, Miss Sinclair," he muttered in her ear. "Hayes, show yourself, or the lady gets hurt." "I'm right here," the voice came from directly behind. Them. Before Delaney could turn, something heavy connected with the back of his head. His grip on Eleanor loosened as he crumpled to the ground, revealing Frank Miller standing behind him, rifle butt still raised. "You all right, Miss Sinclair?" the foreman asked gruffly. "Yes," Eleanor managed, rubbing her bruised arm. "Where's Jackson and Abigail?" "Here," Jackson called, emerging from the shadows with his own rifle at the ready. His face was grim, a darkening bruise on his cheekbone, suggesting he hadn't subdued Campbell without a fight. "Abigail's in the house with Rosa and Tucker. Campbell's tied up in the barn." Eleanor moved to Jackson's side, relief washing over her. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he dismissed, his free hand reaching to touch her face briefly, reassuring himself of her safety. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "They said my father is in Denver." Jackson's expression darkened further. "I know." Campbell was quite eager to share that information once we persuaded him. "We need to go," Eleanor urged. "If these two don't report back, he'll send more men." "Already taken care of," Miller interjected, binding Delaney's unconscious form with rope. "Tucker and the boys are setting up a welcome for any more visitors. No one's getting near this ranch without us knowing about it." Jackson turned to Eleanor, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "The maps, did you get them to Abigail?" "Rosa has them," Eleanor confirmed. "But Jackson, we're out of time. If my father is already in Denver, the survey is just a formality. He's already decided on the route through Willow Creek. Then we'll have to convince him to change his mind," Jackson said with quiet determination. Eleanor laughed bitterly. "You don't know my father. He doesn't change his mind once it's set on something, especially not when it involves his precious railway." "Perhaps," Jackson acknowledged, "but he's never had to face opposition from his own daughter before." Eleanor stared at him, comprehension dawning. "You want me to confront him in Denver?" "It's our best chance," Jackson said simply. "He sent men to bring you back because you matter to his plans. That gives you leverage." "Or it makes me a prisoner again the moment I'm within his reach," Eleanor countered. "Not if we do this right." Jackson's gaze was steady, confident in a way that calmed her rising panic. "You won't be alone this time, Eleanor. I'll be with you." The declaration hung between them, weighted with everything still unspoken. Eleanor searched his face, finding no doubt there, only determination and something deeper that made her heart race. "Why would you risk everything for this?" she asked softly. "For me." Jackson's free hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Because some things are worth fighting for. This land, this community." His voice dropped lower. "You." Before Eleanor could respond, Miller cleared his throat. "Hate to interrupt, but we need to move these fellas somewhere secure before they wake up. And we should get Miss Sinclair inside where it's safe." Jackson nodded, releasing Eleanor's hand reluctantly. "You're right. Let's secure the ranch first, then make plans." He turned to Eleanor. "We'll continue this conversation inside." As they made their way toward the main house, Jackson walking protectively close, Eleanor found herself torn between fear of confronting her father and a growing resolve. For too long, she had run from William Sinclair's influence. Perhaps it was time to face him directly, not as the obedient daughter he had tried to mold, but as the woman she had become at the Silverhorn. Abigail met them at the door, shotgun still in hand, her expression fierce. "Rosa told me what happened. Are you both all right?" "We're fine," Jackson assured her. "Campbell and Delaney won't be troubling anyone for a while." "Good," Abigail said grimly, "because we have work to do." She gestured to the dining table, where the survey maps were spread out beneath the lamplight. "Rosa got these to me just before all hell broke loose. I've been studying them, and I think I've found something." Eleanor approached the table eagerly, Jackson at her side. "The canyon?" she asked, recalling her conversation with Harrington. "Better," Abigail replied, tapping a section of the map just east of the canyon. "There's an underground spring network here that doesn't appear on their survey. Grandfather's journals mention it causing significant problems when they tried to build the original wagon road through the area." Jackson leaned closer, examining the spot. "How significant?" "Sinkholes that swallowed a wagon and 4 horses," Abigail said with grim satisfaction. "The road had to be rerouted 5 miles south, exactly where the old Dunstan Pass line would take the railway." Eleanor studied the alternative route. It bypassed Willow Creek entirely, instead running through an uninhabited stretch of valley before rejoining the proposed route 20 miles east. "This could work," she said slowly. "Engineering challenges are the one thing my father respects. He won't risk a repeat of the Clarion Bridge collapse, not after the lawsuits nearly bankrupted his Eastern Division. So we present him with evidence that his current route is unsafe," Jackson concluded, "and offer the southern route as a safer alternative." "Exactly." Eleanor traced the alternative path with her finger. "But he won't take my word for it. We'll need documentation, grandfather's journals, geological surveys, witness accounts of the spring network." "The tribal elders might help," Abigail suggested, "and we can arrange for Harrington to discover the springs himself during his survey." "It won't be enough," Eleanor said, the weight of her knowledge of her father heavy on her shoulders. "Not unless I present it to him personally. He needs to see that I'm serious, that I'm willing to oppose him directly if he proceeds with the original route." Jackson's hand is covered. Here's where it rested on the map. "Then that's what we'll do. Together." Their eyes met across the table, a silent understanding passing between them. This was no longer just about stopping a railway or preserving a ranch. It was about claiming the future they both wanted, a future that could only exist if William Sinclair's shadow no longer darkened. Their path. "Denver, then," Eleanor said with newfound resolve. "We leave at first light." The journey to Denver was tense and swift. Eleanor, Jackson, and Abigail traveled by stagecoach, the fastest mode available, with Grandfather Hayes's journals, geological surveys, and tribal testimonies securely packed in Jackson's saddlebag. Frank Miller remained behind to oversee the ranch and ensure Campbell and Delaney stayed secure until their business was concluded. Eleanor sat beside Jackson, drawing strength from his steady presence as the landscape rushed by. She had exchanged her work clothes for the blue dress from the festival, a compromise between the ranch hand she had become and the society daughter she would need to present to her father. "Tell me about him," Jackson said quietly, as the coach rattled through. "The mountain passes. What should we expect?" Eleanor gazed out at the passing scenery, organizing her thoughts. "My father values precision, efficiency, and authority above all else. He respects strength, but despises what he considers weakness, particularly emotional appeals." She turned to Jackson. "He won't be moved by stories of disrupted lives or community hardship. Only facts, figures, and potential liability will influence his decision." "Then that's what we'll give him," Abigail said firmly, patting the satchel containing their evidence. Cold, hard facts about why his planned route is a disaster waiting to happen. Eleanor wished she shared their confidence. William Sinclair had built his empire by steamrolling opposition, seeing only opportunities where others saw obstacles. That his daughter would stand among those obstacles would enrage him beyond reason. Denver rose before them by late afternoon, a bustling city of brick and timber that showcased the prosperity her father's railways had helped create. The grandest hotel dominated the central square, its elegant facade a stark contrast to the more utilitarian structures surrounding it. "That's where he'll be staying," Eleanor said, nodding toward the hotel as their coach rolled to a stop at the station. "The Brown Palace. He never stays anywhere else in Denver." "Then that's where we're going," Jackson decided, helping Eleanor down from the coach. "We can't just walk in," she cautioned. "My father will have men watching for me, especially after Campbell and Delaney failed to report back." Jackson considered this. "We need to get word to him privately then, a message he can't ignore but won't alert his men." Eleanor thought for a moment, then smiled. "I know exactly how to do that." An hour later, dressed in clothes borrowed from a sympathetic shopkeeper who knew Jackson's family, Eleanor slipped unrecognized into the Brown Palace's elegant lobby. She approached the front desk with the confident bearing of someone who belonged there. "I need to send a message to one of your guests," she told the clerk. "William Sinclair." The young man's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Sinclair has left instructions. Not to be disturbed, miss." "I think he'll make an exception," Eleanor said, sliding a folded paper across the desk. "Please ensure this reaches him personally." The clerk hesitated, then nodded, taking the note. Eleanor retreated to a secluded corner of the lobby, heart pounding, as she waited to see if her gambit would work. The message contained just 5 words. Her mother's last words to her father before she died, something only Eleanor would know. Less than 10 minutes later, the clerk approached her. "Mr. Sinclair will see you now, miss. Suite 412. Eleanor took a deep breath and made her way to the elevator. Jackson and Abigail would be watching from across the street, ready to intervene if she didn't return or signal within the hour. This first meeting needed to be private, father and daughter settling old scores before the real negotiation began. The elevator operator let her out on the 4th floor, and Eleanor walked slowly down the carpeted hallway to suite 412. Before she could knock, the door swung open. William Sinclair stood framed in the doorway, as imposing as she remembered. Tall and broad-shouldered despite his 60 years, with silver streaks dark hair and piercing blue eyes that had lost none of their intensity. Those eyes widened almost imperceptibly at the sight of her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. "You look different." "Hello, father," she replied, striving for the same composure. "May I come in?" He stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing her into a lavishly appointed sitting room. Maps and papers covered a large table by the window, the coming railway always his first priority. "I assume Campbell and Delaney failed in their task," William remarked, closing the door. "Are they dead?" The casual question shocked Eleanor despite her preparation. "No, just detained." William nodded, as if this was merely a minor operational detail. "You've led us on quite a chase, daughter. 3 months of searching, considerable expense, all because you couldn't accept your duty to this family." "My duty?" Eleanor echoed, feeling the old anger rising. "You mean my sale to the Thornton family to secure your business interests?" "A merger advantageous to both families," William corrected coldly. "One that would have secured your future and the future of Sinclair Railways. Instead, you chose this theatrical rebellion." His gaze swept over her altered appearance with barely disguised distaste. "Working as a common laborer, I'm told, sleeping in servants' quarters, consorting, with local ranchers. The last accusation carried a particular venom that told Eleanor more than her father had intended. He knew about Jackson. Somehow, he knew. "I chose freedom," she countered, standing her ground. "I chose to make my own way, on my own terms." Childish fantasy," William dismissed. "One that ends today. You'll return to Boston with me tomorrow. Gregory has been remarkably understanding about your adventure. The wedding will proceed as planned next month." Eleanor shook her head. "I'm not here to surrender, Father. I'm here to negotiate." William's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Negotiate? You have nothing to offer, Eleanor, nothing to bargain with." "I have information about your planned railway through Willow Creek," she replied evenly. "Information that could save you millions in construction costs and potential lawsuits." For the first time, she had his full attention. William gestured to a chair. "Sit. Explain." Eleanor remained standing. "Not yet. First, we establish terms. I'll share what I know about geological hazards along your planned route and provide documentation supporting an alternate path. In exchange, you will formally release me from any obligation to marry Gregory Thornton and agree to leave the Silverhorn Ranch undisturbed by your railway." William's laugh was short and cold. "You've developed audacity during your little adventure, I'll grant you that, but you overestimate your position. Whatever information you think you have, my surveyors will discover it independently." "After you've committed resources to the current route?" Eleanor challenged. "After construction has begun. The Clarion Bridge collapse cost you $3 million and 7 lives. How much is prevention worth?" A muscle ticked in William's jaw, the only sign that her words had struck home. The Clarion disaster had been the one significant blot on his otherwise ruthlessly efficient record. "You have 1 hour," he said finally. "Present your evidence. If it has merit, I will consider alternatives." Eleanor knew this small concession was as much as she could expect for now. "I need to retrieve my associates in our documentation." "Associates?" William's eyes narrowed. "Who else is involved in this scheme?" "The owners of the Silverhorn Ranch," Eleanor replied, watching his reaction carefully. "They have historical records dating back 3 generations that document the geological instability in question." Something flickered in William's expression. Calculation, perhaps, or grudging respect. "1 hour," he repeated. "And Eleanor, if this is merely a delaying tactic, you will find my patience exhausted. Permanently." The threat hung in the air between them as Eleanor turned and left the suite, her composure maintained until the elevator doors closed behind her. Only then did she allow herself a shaky breath, acknowledging how much her father's presence still affected her. Jackson and Abigail were waiting anxiously at their arranged meeting point across the street. "You're all right?" Jackson asked immediately, his eyes scanning her face for signs of distress. "I'm fine," Eleanor assured him. "He's agreed to hear us out. We have an hour." They gathered their documentation and returned to the Brown Palace. This time, they were escorted directly to William's suite, where he had been joined by Edward Harrington and another man Eleanor recognized as Thomas Reynolds, his chief engineer. William's gaze sharpened as it landed on Jackson. "Mr. Hayes, I presume I've heard a great deal about you from my associates." "Mr. Sinclair," Jackson acknowledged with cool civility. "I wish I could say the same." The tension in the room was palpable as introductions were completed. Then they got down to business, spreading maps and journals across the conference table. For the next 40 minutes, they presented their case methodically, emphasizing the engineering challenges and potential liabilities of the current route. Abigail detailed her grandfather's encounters with the underground spring network, showing the precise locations of historical sinkholes. Jackson presented comparative cost analyses of the northern versus southern routes, demonstrating that while the southern path was slightly longer, its construction and maintenance costs would be substantially lower due to more stable terrain. Eleanor watched her father closely throughout the presentation. His expression gave nothing away, but she knew the signs of his interest. The slight tilt of his head, the focused attention he gave to the geological surveys. When they finished, William turned to Harrington. "You've examined the area in question." The surveyor shifted uncomfortably. "Not in detail, sir. Our preliminary work focused on the most direct route, as instructed." "A costly oversight," William observed coolly, causing the man to pale. He turned to Reynolds. "Your assessment?" The engineer had been examining the documents with professional interest. "The Hayes records appear credible. If these underground springs exist as described, they would indeed present significant engineering challenges. Possibly prohibitive ones." William nodded once, then fixed his piercing gaze on Eleanor. "You've made your point regarding the railway route, a convincing case for the southern alternative." His tone hardened. "But let's not pretend this is merely about engineering concerns. What is your relationship with Mr. Hayes?" The abrupt change of subject caught Eleanor off guard. She felt Jackson tense beside her, but kept her eyes on her father. "That's not relevant to the railway discussion." "It's entirely relevant to my daughter's future," William countered. "A future that includes responsibilities to the Sinclair name and legacy." Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "My future is my own to determine. That includes who I choose to share it with." William's expression darkened. "You would throw away everything, your birthright, your position, the future of our family's company, for a ranch owner in a backwater town?" "I would choose happiness and integrity over wealth and a loveless marriage," Eleanor corrected him. "And Jackson Hayes has built something authentic and honorable, qualities your railway empire could learn from." Jackson placed a supportive hand on her arm. "Mr. Sinclair, your daughter is the most remarkable woman I've ever known. In the short time she's been at the Silverhorn, she's transformed from a stranger to someone indispensable to the ranch and to me personally." William studied them both, his expression calculating. "And if I refuse to change the railway route, if I insist on Eleanor's return to Boston and her obligations there?" "Then you lose on multiple fronts," Eleanor said quietly. "You risk millions. On an unstable railway route, face potential disaster like Clarion all over again, and permanently alienate your only child." She stepped closer to her father. "Is that really the legacy you want, Father? To be remembered as the man who sacrificed both sound business judgment and his daughter's happiness for stubbornness?" A heavy silence fell over the room. For a long moment, William Sinclair regarded his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, not as the obedient society daughter she had been, but as the confident, determined woman she had become. "You are remarkably like your mother," he said finally, something almost like admiration in his tone. "She was the only person who ever successfully challenged my decisions." He turned to Reynolds. "Conduct a thorough survey of the southern route. Immediately. If it proves viable, prepare to redirect our resources." To Harrington he added, "Your team's oversight regarding the spring network will be addressed in your next performance review." Both men nodded quickly, relief evident in their expressions. William returned his attention to Eleanor. "As for you, daughter, it seems I underestimated your resolve." His gaze shifted to include Jackson. "And perhaps I've been rigid in my approach to your future." Eleanor barely dared to breathe. This was more concession than she had ever expected from William Sinclair. "Does this mean you're releasing me from the engagement to Gregory?" she asked cautiously. William's mouth tightened. "The Thornton alliance is valuable, but not at the cost of a disastrous railway route, or a daughter who would clearly go to extraordinary lengths to escape the match. He sighed, a rare display of genuine emotion. Yes, Eleanor, you're released from the engagement. I will handle Thornton. Relief washed over Eleanor, so powerful she felt momentarily light-headed. Jackson's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that did not go unnoticed by her father. "I assume this means you won't be returning to Boston," William said, his tone neutral, but his eyes missing nothing. Eleanor squeezed Jackson's hand. "No, father. My home is in Willow Creek now, at the Silverhorn." William nodded once, accepting her decision with more grace than she had anticipated. "Then I have a counter-proposal for you both." He moved to the table and indicated the map of the Southern Railway route. "This alternate path will require a new station and depot somewhere approximately here." His finger tapped a location about 5 miles south of Willow Creek. "That's Hayes Land," Jackson observed, "the southern pasture of the Silverhorn." "Indeed," William confirmed. "I propose to purchase that section at a fair market value, substantially above current rates, for the new Willow Creek station. The railway needs a local representative to oversee operations, manage shipping contracts with local ranchers, and coordinate cattle transport." His gaze fixed on Eleanor, someone who understands both the railway business and the needs of the community. Eleanor stared at her father in disbelief. "You're offering me a position with Sinclair Railways?" "I'm offering you the chance to build something of your own while maintaining your connection to the family business," William clarified. "A compromise that respects your independence while acknowledging your birthright." It was a masterful move, Eleanor had to admit. Her father was offering legitimacy to her new life while preserving his investment in the region and his relationship with his daughter. On his terms, certainly, William Sinclair would never cede control entirely, but with more respect for her choices than she had believed possible. She looked to Jackson, silently asking his opinion. His eyes held nothing but support. "It's your decision," he said softly. "But having a Sinclair managing the railway's local operations would ensure fair treatment for all the ranchers in the valley." Eleanor turned back to her father. "I'll consider it on one condition. The contract for the southern route must be finalized before any other negotiations proceed. The Silverhorn and Willow Creek must be protected first." William's mouth quivered in what might almost have been a smile. "You drive a hard bargain, daughter. Very well, Reynolds will have the revised plans on my desk by morning, and construction orders will be amended accordingly." He extended his hand to Jackson. "It seems we have an agreement, Mr. Hayes." Jackson hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. "It seems we do, Mr. Sinclair." As formal business concluded and the engineers departed to begin their revised work, an awkward silence fell among the remaining three. Abigail, sensing the need for father and daughter to speak privately, excused herself to wait in the hotel lobby. When the door closed behind her, William turned to Eleanor. "This ranch owner, he treats you well." The unexpected concern in his voice caught Eleanor by surprise. "Yes, father, better than I ever expected to be treated." William nodded, satisfaction and something like regret mingling in his expression. "Your mother would have approved of your spirit, if not your methods." He moved to a sideboard and poured himself a small measure of brandy. "I should have seen that you inherited her independence along with her eyes." It was the closest thing to an apology Eleanor had ever heard from him. "We're more alike than either of us wants to admit," she offered, the realization surprising her even as she spoke it. "Stubborn, determined to forge our own paths." "Perhaps," William acknowledged with the ghost of a smile, "though I'd like to think I would have found a less dramatic way to assert my independence than hiding as a ranch hand." "It wasn't the plan," Eleanor admitted, "but it turned out to be exactly what I needed." William studied her for a long moment. "You've changed, Eleanor." Groan. His gaze shifted to Jackson, who had maintained a respectful distance during their exchange. "I suppose I have Mr. Hayes to thank for that." "I have myself to thank," Eleanor corrected gently. "Jackson gave me the space and support to discover who I could be when I wasn't defined by the Sinclair name, but the strength was always within me, something else I inherited from both my parents." The acknowledgement seemed to satisfy William. He raised his glass slightly. To new beginnings then, on all fronts. As they prepared to leave, William called after them. "Eleanor, I expect regular reports on the station's progress once construction begins. Weekly telegrams at minimum." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "Of course, Father. I wouldn't have it any other way." Outside the hotel, Jackson pulled her close beneath the star-filled Denver sky. "Are you all right?" he asked, searching her face. "Better than all right," Eleanor replied, the future stretching before them with newfound promise. "For the first time, I feel like I don't have to choose between who I was and who I've become. I can be both Eleanor Sinclair and Ellie Smith." The heiress and the ranch hand. Jackson smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "And which one am I in love with?" The declaration, so simply stated, filled Eleanor with joy. "Both," she answered, "always both." His kiss beneath the Denver stars sealed a promise that had begun in the dust and work of the Silverhorn. A love born of honesty, respect, and the courage to forge a new path together. 3 months later, as summer faded into autumn, Eleanor stood on the porch of the Silverhorn's main house, now her home with Jackson as husband and wife. In the valley below, construction had begun on the new railway station, its design a harmonious blend of function and beauty that complemented rather than dominated the landscape. William Sinclair had attended their wedding, arriving on the first inspection train to reach the new southern route. His gift to the couple had been unexpected. Full ownership of the Silverhorn transferred to both their names, along with a substantial investment in expanding their cattle operation. "Insurance," he had explained pragmatically. "The railway benefits from strong local businesses, particularly those run by families." Eleanor knew better. It was his way of acknowledging that she had found her place, not as the society bride he had envisioned, but as a woman of substance who had earned respect on her own terms. As Jackson joined her on the porch, sliding an arm around her waist, Eleanor leaned into his embrace. The journey from frightened runaway to confident ranch owner and railway station manager had been unexpected, challenging, and ultimately transformative. "Any regrets?" Jackson asked, following her gaze to the distant construction. Eleanor shook her head, thinking of the shy ranch hand who had claimed to know farm work, the heiress who had fled an arranged marriage, and the woman she had become, who had found a way to reconcile both worlds. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step led me here." In the distance, a train whistle sounded, progress approaching on iron rails, bringing change that no longer threatened but promised new beginnings. Eleanor smiled, ready to meet whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that she had finally found where she truly belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.